This evening or tomorrow, there will be a very, very important vote regarding the extension of long-term unemployment benefits. And what that vote is about is to make it very clear which side we are on. Are we prepared to stand with over 1 million workers and their children and say, no, we're not going to turn our backs on you. We're not going to leave you literally out on the cold, worrying how you're going to heat your homes or pay your rent or put gas in your car. Or as fellow Americans, we are going to stand with you and make sure that you at least have some income through extended unemployment benefits coming in to your family. Mr. President, I think, as we all know, the good news is that unemployment has gone down in recent years. When President Bush left office, we were hemorrhaging over 700,000 jobs a month, clearly unsustainable, clearly a tragedy for our nation. Today, while the economy is nowhere near where it needs to be, where we want it to be, the fact of the matter is we are growing several 100,000 jobs a month. That's the good news. The bad news is that real unemployment today is close to 13% if we count those people who have given up looking for work and those people who are working part-time when they want to work full-time. And the even worse news is that long-term unemployment today is almost the highest that it has ever been on record. Today, it takes about 37 weeks for the average unemployed American to find a job. 37 weeks. Today, 37% of unemployed Americans have been out of work for more than 6 months. Today, there are 3 job applicants for every 1 job opening. And the reality is that there are simply not enough jobs for the 11 million Americans who actively seek work. And if we do not extend unemployment benefits now for this 1.3 million Americans, the situation will only become worse, and by the end of the year, we will be looking at close to 5 million Americans whose benefits will have been exhausted. Mr. President, I understand that some of my Republican friends are saying, well, yes, we are prepared to extend these unemployment benefits, but we need an offset. So let me suggest to some of my Republican friends that if that is their position, and I should point out that under President Bush, when long-term unemployment was not as serious a problem as it is today, under President Bush, time and time again, extended unemployment benefits were seen as an emergency and were passed without offsets. But if my Republican friends think that they desperately need an offset now that Barack Obama is president, let me just suggest a few of the areas that they may want to explore. Mr. President, we are losing about $100 billion every single year because corporate America is putting their money into tax havens in the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, and elsewhere. Well, if we need an offset, what about telling the 1 out of 4 corporations in this country who today pay nothing in federal taxes that we're going to end their loopholes? Are we prepared to demand that corporate America start paying their fair share of taxes so that long-term unemployed Americans can afford to have food on their table or heat in their homes. Mr. President, many of my Republican colleagues think that we should repeal completely the estate tax, a tax which only applies to the top 0.3% of the wealthiest people in America. We are talking about families like the Walton family that are worth $100 billion. If some of my Republican friends think that the Walton family, the wealthiest family in America, needs another tax break, while working Americans who are desperately searching for work should not get any help at all, I would suggest to my Republican colleagues that they are way, way out of touch with the values of America and the values that make this a great country. Mr. President, I think there are some people who think that the folks who are long-term unemployed right now just don't want to work. That is grossly unfair and grossly untrue. Let me just give you a few examples. In Hagerstown, Maryland, 3,600 of our fellow citizens recently applied to work at a dairy farm to process milk and ice cream. This dairy farm will be hiring 36 people, and yet 3,600 people applied for 36 jobs. Do those people want to work? They sure do. Last October, Walmart received over 11,000 job applications for stores they are opening in Washington, D.C., and as we all know, Walmart is not the highest paying employer in America. And yet they received 11,000 applications here in the D.C. area at a time when they will be only hiring 1,800 workers. And that type of scenario is true in many, many parts of this country. An employer puts an ad in the paper, makes it known that the company needs workers, and you're seeing 10 times as many workers apply for the limited jobs. Last point that I want to make, Mr. President, is not only is this a moral issue, the issue of not turning our backs on people, some of whom have worked for their entire lives at this moment when they and their families have so much need. That's the moral issue. But there is an economic component as well. If a long-term unemployed worker does not get the average $300 check that he or she would otherwise get, what kind of money does that person have to spend locally? And what the economists tell us is that when we dry that source of spending up in communities all over this country, when people don't have the money to buy the goods and services that they desperately need, that in itself, that lack of spending, will result in several 100,000 jobs in the overall economy being lost. So not extending unemployment not only hurts the individual, but it hurts our overall economy. And the economists also tell us that not extending long-term unemployment benefits will reduce our GDP by about 0.2%. So, Mr. President, we have a moral issue, we have an economic issue, and if my Republican colleagues want offsets, there are more than enough offsets available if they are prepared to ask some of the wealthiest people in this country and some of the largest corporations in America to start paying their fair share of taxes. But the bottom line is that in an economy which today is still hurting very deeply, we cannot punish people who are severely in need. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.